Welcome to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding Love with me, Elizabeth Cunningham. My mission is to expand the conversation of love in the world. Is it possible to have deep, loving, healthy relationships? Have you ever been curious about having more than one relationship or partner at a time? Get ready to transform in love, be courageous, and set yourself free. In this show, we talk about relationships, sex, love, and the ways we wish we could be, but never thought were possible. The Elizabeth Cunningham Show starts now. Welcome to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding in Love. And today we are talking about we're speaking English. Today we're talking about being liberated in love. But before we get into that and introduce our phenomenal guest, a reminder that the Elizabeth Cunningham Show is live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on the Transformation Network Facebook page and is then aired on YouTube and podcast every single Thursday. All links are in the show notes, so you never miss anything. On today's episode, we will be talking with Katrin about liberated in love. Katrin finds joy in helping you become liberated in love to create your dream relationships with your partner or partners, rooted in safety, love, and pleasure. Compassion and passion. Her holistic approach is designed to feel glowing, happy, and confident in many facets of your life, both inside and outside of the bedroom. Katrin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Oh my gosh, wonderful. Well, today we are talking about being liberated in love, which is what you talk about all of the time. So I'm going to mostly hand it over to you. Tell us, what do you mean by being liberated in love?
Yeah, liberation is this word that feels really close to my heart because it's so synonymous with just feeling alive and with freedom, whatever that actually means to each unique person. In love, that's the way I want to live my life, being in love with every moment and staying present in my experience of the world, in my relationships, in my friendships. And I find that this is one of the keys to success to living a fulfilling life, right? Just feeling free to be yourself in whatever context you choose to live your life.
Yeah, I think that that's really beautiful. And I think as we progress, I'm really excited about this episode because we're going to talk a lot about a holistic approach of looking at love, sex, and relationships. And just the way that you describe what being liberated means to you, really, it has that forethought of that really it is a holistic approach to love, sex, and relationships, because it really is about your entire life, not just about one area.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the way that we show up in one area of our life, or even in one activity or task, is actually representative of how we do everything. Whether it is how we're eating our breakfast in a rushed kind of way and, sort of looking forward to the day, or the way that we learn, it is all kind of mirroring how we show up in other parts of our life, and specifically our relationships. So I feel like when we talk about sex, love, and relationships, we also have to encompass just how we be in general in our everyday activities. So it's all connected. It's crazy how interconnected it really is.
I absolutely agree with that. I think the more and more that you get into this work, the more you're like, oh my gosh, I really am the same person doing everything, and being able to see that in other people and in your relationships as well is really helpful to notice those patterns and what you see is working and not working about those things, and what you want to shift and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said.
Beautiful. So we're talking about this holistic approach in love, sex, and relationships, which is a really broad topic. So what do you help people with when people come to you? How do they get help from you? What do you help people with?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start by sharing a little bit of my story to give you the flavor of where I even began as to how I support people. I was in the corporate world for some time. And though I felt fulfilled in some ways in my professional life, there was this backstory of my experience that felt very much in the shadows, and this secret that I was holding away. And that was my experience of painful sex, in particular this body response that's called vaginismus. Vaginismus is kind of like having a panic attack in your vagina, because it is when your pelvic floor muscles involuntarily contract, making it either impossible or extremely painful to have any sort of penetration. And this doesn't only include PIV sex, penis and vagina sex, but using a tampon, having a pelvic exam, etc. And so it was a really private pain that I was going through. And I honestly thought, I'm the only person in the world, because if you go do the Google search, it felt like a black hole of nothingness related to other people's stories that, you could potentially find some comfort in.
Mm.
So the way that I overcame vaginismus was a holistic approach of emotional healing, finding and embracing my authentic sexual self, who that woman really is, having the fire, the spark come alive in my eroticism, and of course the physical healing that was related to vaginismus. But since then, I've noticed that the way that women had come to me to find some support and guidance in overcoming vaginismus was really applicable to love and relationships as a whole, and even a foundation of that, of finding safety, not only in our eroticism and sex, but finding safety in the world and how we interact with the people in our lives. So today, what I help people with is creating this sense of safety, which naturally leads to curiosity and then leads to pleasure in our lives, that in a way that feels authentic to us and how we want to run the game of love, if we choose to call it that.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story. I agree with you. I think that it's not talked about very much. The only time, actually, the only experience that I've had with like a story being told about vaginismus was like on a Netflix miniseries, but they didn't even name it that. It was just like this woman was experiencing really painful sex. And she was in a very strict religion where she needed to be making babies. And so it was like the main story was like her escape from this really strict religion, but like that's how it started. But like that can be relatable for people, but it's also like a Netflix series and it's not a quote unquote real person. And so I think that you sharing your story and being open and also like because how you're being about it is just like it's okay, like it's okay if you're experiencing this is what I experienced, and just making that experience okay and really lending to your value of safety and that principle of safety even in the way that you share it. And so I also just want to commend you for being that for other women who are experiencing or other people who have vaginas who are experiencing this as well. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome, and thank you. I appreciate that. I really do believe that healing, and I don't even really love the word healing because there is nothing to fix, right? We're all whole and complete. It's a process of evolution, really, but any sort of that evolution happens in community, when we feel supported, when we feel heard, when we feel loved in our experience rather than isolated in our pain. So as soon as women, vulva owners come together and can have conversations about these things, so many doors open, so much unlocks in how we get to experience our bodies. And like you said, it really comes down to finding safety in that and finding an ear to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that you've had this experience and you've started to have people who've come to you for this help, and you're creating this community as well, like what do you see is unfolding now? Like what's the thing that you see that is, you talked about holistic approach as well, but what are some things that you see that really help in when people are dealing with this?
One of the main principles that really helps is, and it's what the journey is all about, is self-love and acceptance. So part of what's opened up from the beginning of my work in supporting women overcoming vaginismus is this underlying layer of like, what are the things that we shame ourselves about and feel guilty about in our lives, or things we try to hide away about ourselves that actually mask our authenticity? And Gabor Mate, he puts it so beautifully. He says we have two main needs. One is the need for connection, acceptance, sort of like being loved, and the next is our need of authenticity. And as soon as our need for connection is sort of, um, I guess, challenged in some way, we always, as human beings, stick with getting the love, but we throw the need for authenticity out the door.
Mm.
And hence we lose ourselves. And so overcoming vaginismus, creating fulfilling relationships is about finding ourselves again. And that's part of what has really opened up in my work with people and how I support couples and multiple partners in relationships.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Well, we are going to take a break. And when we come back, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that might look like. Like, we're talking about just in general, what happens, but I'd love to hear people's experiences. Like, what do you see? What do you see happening with people? And really, what's the as lived experience? Because I totally get that like need for connection, and then we throw out the authenticity 100%. But when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Hey, welcome back to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding Love. And we are here with Katrin, and we are talking about being liberated in love, and specifically talking about people who are dealing with vaginismus and what that looks like in your life, and the holistic approach that we can take with our entire lives to heal painful things that are happening in our bodies. And before break, we were talking about just generally like what that is, what is a holistic approach, what does being liberated in love mean? If you missed it, please go back and listen. And now I would really love to get into what does that actually look like? Like, what are some examples or stories of people who came to you with this issue, and then you used a holistic approach with them, and then what happened?
Yeah, I love looking at the reality of it, right? Because we can talk
Yeah.
theory all day, but unless we actually understand what are the impacts, we can't really imagine where we're even going. And it's important to visualize that before we can get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so here are some examples, right? Perhaps somebody decided to wait until marriage to have sex. And by sex, I want to note this as PIV sex, right? Because we could have so many other forms of sex, and our society unfortunately defines sex so narrowly and how it's represented in the media, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But they're looking forward to this, whether it's on their wedding day or at any other point, right? Maybe there's some nervous energy around it. And as soon as they try to have PIV sex, they feel like there's a wall there. There's just no opening. And I remember feeling and thinking to myself, like, do I even have a vagina? Where is my vaginal opening? I feel like our sex education, in many ways, is fear based. Many cultures don't have a sex education. And in that way, whatever we don't speak about doesn't really even exist to us. So I felt personally very disconnected from the lower part of my body for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, this wall is there. And maybe you try another few times, like I did with my boyfriend at the time at 18 years old. And maybe there's some penetration starting to happen, but it feels excruciatingly painful, like a knife that's been warmed over a fire and then inserted in you.
Oh my gosh.
So, as you might imagine, this experience is super scary. And all of a sudden, we start having these questions of, like, all right, I knew first time sex was supposed to hurt, as we're being told in society, but is this really normal? Like, I'm starting to think like this shouldn't be the way that it goes. We head over to our doctor. Our doctor, unfortunately, often isn't very helpful. I remember mine telling me to have a glass of wine and relax and just breathe, or maybe that my body's just not ready for it and I should just wait. And so we feel very disempowered.
Yeah.
Aside from this picture that goes on in the bedroom when it comes to sex, what also happens is that we lose our sense of confidence with our eroticism, which I like to define as like our life force energy, our aliveness, our passion in life. And our relationships might feel you know, stale. Maybe additional challenges come up, communication kind of dies down because we don't want to think about the thing. Because we avoid the pain, the mental and emotional and physical pain. And I remember even avoiding kissing my partner because I was dreading where it might lead and the pain that was there. So, what does the journey past that look like? It really starts with emotional healing and understanding what has shaped our experiences in our childhood in particular. I feel like emotional healing is at the root of all physical manifestation. If we get into spirituality and follows.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely agree with that. We often do think that it's like it's a physical thing in my body. And so therefore I need to heal it physically. Like there's a physical modality, like you went to your doctor,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I've also had experiences, especially with things that are concerning my vagina, where it's just like doctors have not been very helpful, which is kind of interesting. You would hope that doctors would be helpful in that area, and they don't seem to be. But it's also a larger cultural problem of how we view sex and how we view female sex and how we view female pleasure. And anyway, I digress. But I completely agree with you that everything starts with your emotions, or yeah, even your spirituality as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, and we really do live in a shame-steeped culture around sex. And so part of emotional healing is understanding the factors that have contributed to that for us, whether it
Mm.
was specifically related to sex or it may have been related to our experience of relationships or the gender that our partner of interest is. So for me, fear of the masculine was actually a really relevant component to this. Not because I had fear of the masculine related to eroticism. And some people also ask this question, well, I have no sexual trauma, right? Why am I experiencing a sexual problem when I don't have sexual trauma? And we can go into the whole discussion of what trauma it really is and how broad it actually is. But the reality of it is that if you had experienced something that led you to believe you need to protect yourself from another person, like a man in particular, or that men are angry, or there's unexpected outbursts that can happen at any moment, and you have to be on this high alert sort of state, then of course your body is going to be in a protection mode.
Yeah.
And that's what vaginismus really is. That's what numbness with sex is, or different.
That makes absolute sense. I think, well, we really do live in a culture where women are, and specifically women, but definitely again, people who are non-binary, absolutely to protect yourself. And the messages that women receive are that men are scary, that you do need to protect yourself, that if you don't protect yourself, then you can be blamed for whatever happens to you, that there's something wrong, that, and you just got to look out, and so we are brought up to be closed off in some way because there's like you aren't safe There's a clear message of you aren't safe, but then there's a contradicting message of like, and you're not safe, and if you're not polite, nice, compliant, you know, willing, then you will also receive punishment in the form of like harshness, anger, abuse. So protect yourself, but you should definitely give yourself to the right person. But if you don't give yourself to the right person, then you will also be punished.
Yeah, like
These are all the messages that I received loud and clear throughout my entire
right.
childhood and all the way up until I was like in my 20s, and they still happen, but I just know that they're not true anymore. Like that's the only difference, is I don't believe them anymore.
Yeah, that's such a key shift is whatever can be happening in the outside world can be the same. But if our inner world is shifted and we choose not to subscribe to that message, then we can live a very different reality. And like you said too, like find that one person, which is in its way, in itself, a limiting viewpoint of what relationships can really be like, right? Well, who says it's one person, right? Can we share love with more than one person?
Mm-hmm.
Some of that also creates this closedness of like, well, am I wrong to be interested in more than one person? And I know that's part of your experience. So I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that could also be really relevant with sexual challenges of any sort.
Mm. And I love that your definition of sex and eroticism is also broader as well, because I don't think, well, first of all, we're not even taught about eroticism in the first place. Like I didn't start learning about eroticism until I started doing this work. And I
Mm.
was like, oh yeah, there's this thing called eroticism. And I was just like, oh yeah, that has something to do with porn, right? Like, you
Yeah.
know? And it's like, oh no. Like, and so I love that what you said was, eroticism is like a life force. It's passion. It's like something that lives inside of you. It's like it's an experience, it's an emotion, it's so much more than that. And yeah. So what are some any other ways that you think that people might feel stuck in where they're at right now?
Yeah, ways that people might feel stuck. I feel like the visceral embodied experience of feeling stuck is noticing that there's another place, that we call it a place or like an experience that we want to be at, but there's something holding us back. Like, an example might be not being able to orgasm. And I've supported women in having their first orgasms. Um, that feels like a sense of stuckness. Well, am I doing it right? Like, is this supposed to be like all there is, or is there more, right? Or a
Mm-hmm.
feeling of stuckness in their marriage when people grow apart, or when they haven't both done the personal development, the emotional work to reignite the spark. So, saved marriages can come out of this. People separating in good faith can also come out of that. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many examples of the stuckness that people experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And we are going to go on another short break. And then when we get back, I want to talk more into the holistic approach. Like, okay, great. Like, these are some examples of how people might be stuck. This is like what people's as lived experience might be. And so now let's move into the holistic approach. Okay, what can we do about that? All right, so when we get back from break, that's what we'll do. Welcome back to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding in Love. And today we are talking with Katrin about being liberated in love. And we've talked a little bit so far about what that means. We've talked about people who are dealing with vaginismus and people who are dealing with pain in their body, specifically related to sex or having sex, and what that actually looks like, what the as lived experience of that is. And now we're going to talk about why take a holistic approach to pain, but also why take a holistic approach to vaginismus, or things that are happening specifically around pain in sex. So we have answered a little bit like why already, but I'm going to ask it again. So like why take a holistic approach? Why is it, I'm just going to say it, why is it the best way?
Yeah. Why is it the best way? I feel like the answer to that question can only really be clear to us when we've done it, when we're on the other side and we're like, holy shit, I tried this one lane of like fixing myself and it didn't work. And it's only after the big picture kind of fell together, like all the puzzle pieces came together, that I actually started to experience a transformation in how I felt about myself, how I felt about my body, therefore, the impact on my relationship, the impact on my daily routine and how much stress I was experiencing, how I managed that. And then after that, and how I felt in life, like a sense of purpose that all of a sudden became more clear or more exciting, the feeling of aliveness. So I really don't think we can truly understand the why until we've lived it. But
Ah, it's the paradox of it. It really is. It's just like, why take the holistic approach? Well, because you'll thank yourself later.
yeah, yeah. And in some way, I mean, if you hear this message of, well, just do it and you'll see, of course, that doesn't sound very motivating. So here are some examples as to what I've learned and therefore what you can kind of like hold on to as you discover your own why. Um, One of the pieces is that the body is so much more involved in a journey to healing, if you want to call it that, than we may have thought, because trauma really is held in the body. So trauma is often, you know, thought of in a very narrow way, where in the context of sex, maybe, you know, trigger warning, I'm about to use the R word here, like if you got raped or something like this. But really, trauma is about what has happened inside of our body as a result of the things that have occurred in our life. And it's really not about the nature of the event, it's about the impact of the nature of the event on you. And it's also not about the intention of the person, it is simply the impact that this event has had on you. So, one event may not be traumatizing for one person, but it may be incredibly traumatizing for another. And so when we think about trauma, we may, you know, seek help from a talk therapist, where beautifully therapists can be very helpful. Yet we only deal with 5% of our behavior, since talk therapy is simply utilizing this conscious mind. How we're having a conversation right now, we're almost like speaking, we're analyzing perhaps, but we're using a very small section of the mind that then leads to our behavior. And 95% of our experience is shaped by what we call the subconscious. And really, the subconscious mind doesn't necessarily live in the brain, it's the experience of each cell in our body. And Bruce Lipton's biology of belief can kind of showcase some of the science around this. So, holistically, we got to be looking at the iceberg underneath the surface to understand what is driving our behavior and how can we shift it. So, cue the body, cue somatic experiences. How is it that we can unlock what we've been carrying with us, these layers and layers of pain that have sort of suppressed also our authenticity? And how is it that we can start to shed those? How is it that we can find safety in letting go of the pieces that we've sort of taken on as who we are, but really they're a consequence of what has happened to us rather than who we actually are.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just like I'm letting that kind of soak in because I think that if we understood that, and I say we as a collective, I think that if we understood that we would live in a very different world. If people understood it, like exactly what you just said. I'm like holding myself back from paraphrasing it, because I think how you said it was really beautiful and really poignant. And that if we just understand that only 5% of how we're being is that conscious part, And the other part is that 95% of subconscious, and subconsciousness isn't the mind. It's also the body. It's also your cells. Um, and I'm going to have you, once we're done with the show, I'm going to have you repeat that resource back, and then I can put it in the show notes. So biology of, what is
Believe.
it? Biology of belief. Okay, great. So that way we can put it in the show notes as well. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's all I have to say about that is thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I'd love to expand on that a little bit because there are
Yeah.
tools that I've discovered that are amazing for the actual practical pieces of
Yeah.
reducing
Please
trauma.
expand. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, Bruce Lipton supports this work called Psych K, which I'm a facilitator of. There are facilitators all over the world focusing in on different topics. But what this really is subconscious belief change processes. How can we reprogram what we picked up as kids when it comes to how the world is registered for us, right? So when we're little, we experience the world as a direct sort of result of ourselves. When I observe my parents fighting, the kind of meaning that I assign to this is I did something wrong. They're fighting because of me. How can I take control over the situation? How can I improve myself? How can I mold and shape myself into something that they are going to be happy with so that they stay together? Right?
Mhm.
See how we make it about ourselves? Like we're meaning making machines.
Mhm.
These rules of how the world is up until the age of 10, 11, 12. And we live with those pieces, those beliefs, those programs is to be able to understand what the programming is by actually communicating with the body rather than the mind, and then change it uh, by healing past trauma and recreating the rules. And aside from that Psyche modality, there's also David Berzelli's work of tension and trauma releasing exercises that I also use with people I support because this is helping to downregulate the nervous system and actually release physical tension from the body. Not with
Mhm.
stretching, not with, although those are beautiful things to enjoy, but they don't really get to the root of the problem, which
Mhm.
is that our nervous system is on high alert, it's in survival mode, and it is desperately looking for relaxation and for release. So those
Mhm.
are just two main pieces that people are welcome to research and get to know as options.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for expanding on that. And I think that the more that this work gets out and available, there are so many resources. Like the more that I dive into it, the more I'm like, oh, wow, there really are so many resources, but you do have to like look for it,
Yeah.
right? It's not just right there on the surface being like, oh, good, there's an ad for transformational, neuroscience.
Yeah. And I do deeply trust that people end up finding what is going to work for them. Not
Yeah.
that there's one key thing that helps everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So following our curiosity and trusting ourselves is part of it. And of course, that's only possible if we're already connected to ourselves. If we're living in the mind or outside of the body, when we dissociate, for example, like I used to do for many years, we're not really even connected to our intuition, to our knowing, to our inner world.
Yeah. I actually just wrote a blog post this week. Was it this week or last week? Oh, time is weird. But it was basically about whatever gets you in the door, right? Because I was also very much like I'm a very driven person. I'm ambitious. I don't need any help from anybody. That's kind of like my mode and or had been. And so when it came to like a holistic view or approach of things, what actually got me in the door to my first like transformational it was a weekend was if you take this course, then you'll be able to make more money. And
Mm,
like part of me is a little embarrassed about like my former self, but like that's what got me in the door.
yeah.
And then from there, realizing all of these things, right? Realizing like, and PS, I did start making more money, but like that was like no longer the point anymore. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here that I just wasn't aware of at all. I was just living in that 5% conscious mind instead of like really seeing that larger iceberg underneath. And so I love that you said, people's curiosity will lead them to where they need to go. I absolutely absolutely endorse that statement.
Mhm.
Like my question of how do I make more money and build a business that I love? Because I did want to help people. Like that was the thing. I was like, I want to build a business that like really helps people and like really helps people in their lives. And so I was like, oh, this course helps people in their lives. And I think it's going to make me more money. So boom, there you go. I'm going to take this course. And that's what led to the rabbit hole that we are in now. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that. That's what got you in the door. And for some people, what might get them in the door is having better orgasms or being confident on a date, right? But all of those pieces are actually going to slowly trickle into the core of knowing ourselves and trusting ourselves and loving ourselves.
Yep. Amen to that. Aho, amen. All right, we're going to take another break. And then when we get back, we're going to do our end of show wrap up. And for every single person who is like, oh my gosh, Katrin, I need to talk to you, we are going to let you know what Katrin is offering and how to get a hold of her. So, all of that when we get back from the break. Welcome back to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding in Love. And we are here with Katrin, and we have been talking about being liberated in love. And we have just gone on this beautiful journey of when you experience pain in sex, if you experience vaginismus, to how you heal and what is the purpose and the liberation of holistic healing. And it's just been a beautiful conversation. Thank you, Katrin, so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so in our last segment here, we are going to do our wrap up questions, and then we're going to talk about how people can get a hold of you and what you're doing, what you're offering. So that way, all of the people who are listening who are like, I must know this person can get a hold of you. All right, so our wrap up questions are, what does love mean to you?
Hmm. What does love mean to me? I think love to me is a way of being and is more so a verb and a choice of having an open heart,
Mm.
having an open heart to the world, and being accepting of everything that we experience. I think that creates for the most sense of freedom and liberation, which is all kind of what love is all about to me.
Mm. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. All right. If people got nothing else, what's one thing that you hope that they got out of the episode today?
If people got nothing else, I would hope that the message they take away is that there's nothing to fix. I feel like we often live our life with this destination in mind of like, I need to be there in order to feel XYZ. And hence, I need to change myself or fix myself.
Mm.
That there's something broken about me. And part of having an experience of being liberated in love is noticing the beauty and the love that's already there with nothing else in our life changing. So
Mm.
that would be it.
Beautiful. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. I hope that they got that too. What is one action that people could take?
One action that people could take would be noticing how, in the present moment, they could experience just 10% more enjoyment or pleasure or whatever word feels, relevant in terms of enjoying that moment.
Mm.
Because if we can consistently keep that top of mind with how we live our life, then I feel like we would be so much more joyful, fulfilled, happy, and just open to the world. It's that 10% more enjoyment. It doesn't have to look like anything. It could simply be a noticing, it could be an energy, it can be a breath, but it changes everything.
Mm. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yes, I love all of those answers. Endorsed all of the answers. All right. Okay, what are you promoting? You actually have a free course.
Yes, I do. The free course is called Safety in Love.
Mhm.
And the course is essentially a 3-day masterclass. On day one, we talk about finding safety in self. Day two is all about safety and pleasure. And three is safety in relationship. And this is a beautiful starting point for feeling liberated in love. If anyone listening is also experiencing vaginismus or painful sex, you may also want to check out Putting Vaginismus in the Past, which is also a free course.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, wow, you have a lot of resources. That's fantastic. Okay, so there's the safety in love, and then the other one is putting vaginismus in the past.
That's right. Yeah.
And then what else are you up to? Is there anything else you're promoting?
Yes. The most transformational work is really one-on-one together through a 4-month journey that I've called Sexually Liberated. And there's also a group program with the same name because, again, healing happens in community and sisterhood. So those two pieces are probably the most involved ways to work together and to go on this journey of play and pleasure to be liberated in love. If you check out the members area, you'll see a bunch of other pieces, but really the most customized approach is just meeting like this and having a conversation and experiencing what healing is like in the body rather than the mind.
Thank you. And all of those links are in the show notes. So anybody who is listening, watching can just scroll down and then click on any of those things that you're like, oh, that is definitely me. I definitely want to do that. Or I'm curious about that. I have a question about that. Go click on the link and Katrin will absolutely take care of you. All right, Katrin, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the work that you do in the world, for the transformation that you cause for people, for the healing that you lead people through. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure, Elizabeth, having this chat, and let's evolve the conversation in whatever way that feels right.
Courageously expanding in love. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, turn on the notification button so that you don't miss anything. We are live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on the Transformation Network Facebook page. And we are also aired then on Thursday every single week on YouTube and podcast. All of those links are in the show notes as well. Everything you need is in the show notes. Show notes. And so until next time, everyone, keep loving. You have been listening to The Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding Love with me, Elizabeth Cunningham. Tune in live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on transformationtalkradio.com, where we shed light on relationships, sex, love, and the ways we wish we could be, but never thought were possible. Learn to love yourself and create the relationships you want. Connect with me at elizabethannecunningham.com. That's elizabethannecunningham.com.